parents always showed a clear preference for my younger sister, and at one point they threw me out of the house for supposedly stealing her bracelet. That incident crushed me. Years down the line, my grandmother decided that I, rather than my sister, should become the main heir to the family's estate. When my parents discovered that, they appeared at my doorstep in tears, pleading for forgiveness and hoping to stake some sort of claim. It's incredible how quickly people change when money is involved, but that moment was just the culmination of years of being overlooked and scapegoated. I want to share the entire story, beginning at the root of it all, so you can grasp exactly how we got here. I grew up in what most people would describe as an unremarkable middle-class environment, 2 parents, a younger sibling, and a modest house in a suburban neighborhood. To the casual observer, we were the embodiment of a wholesome family, but in truth, tensions simmered below the surface, specifically between me and my parents. I could always feel an undercurrent of favoritism toward my sister Emma. It's odd to think about now, because at one time, my parents treated both of us with genuine warmth. We both excelled in our childhood hobbies, piano practice, drawing classes, gymnastics, and for a while, my parents appeared equally proud of each of our accomplishments. During that golden era, I had no inkling that one day, Emma would become the center of their universe, while I turned into the daughter they barely acknowledged. Things started shifting the moment I entered 6th grade. It happened over something as trivial as a single test. I received a grade that was below my usual standard, maybe not a total catastrophe, but certainly not impressive, and it was enough to alter the way my parents looked at me. Suddenly, my mom stopped giving me the same radiant smile she gave Emma after Emma brought home yet another flawless report. The compliments that used to make me feel truly valued became half-hearted, almost as if they were going through the motions. Emma's successes, on the other hand, were celebrated like grand achievements. For the first time, I got the sense that I was teetering on the edge, while Emma was solidly placed on a pedestal that would never wobble. At first, I assumed it might just be a short-lived phase, or perhaps I was overanalyzing. But it quickly became impossible to ignore the contrast in how we were treated. My missteps, no matter how small, were etched in stone, while Emma's blunders vanished into thin air, excused with a gentle, "She's just having a bad day." Meanwhile, I was haunted by that never-ending refrain, "Why can't you be more like Emma?" It clung to me through middle school, high school, and beyond. As we grew older, Emma developed into exactly the kind of daughter my parents wanted, sharp, sociable, and comfortable in any crowd. She took up leadership roles in school, captained committees, always took home top accolades. In contrast, I became more reticent, preferring my own company. I did well enough academically, but my achievements never seemed to stand out next to Emma's. Eventually, I reached a point where I stopped competing for their approval, because it felt like a losing game I'd never win. By the time high school was in full swing, it was crystal clear how unevenly my parents divided their care. Emma got a brand new wardrobe, her very own vehicle, and complete devotion. If she needed homework help, they'd spend hours at the dining table, patiently explaining every nuance. When I needed assistance, I was told they were tired, or that I should figure it out myself. In their eyes, I'd already transitioned into an adult who didn't require guidance, while Emma was still their cherished little princess. I grew accustomed to working for everything I wanted and expecting no handouts. Despite the palpable favoritism, I really tried to maintain a bond with Emma. She was my sister, after all, and there were still moments of genuine closeness. But over time, it became clear that Emma basked in the attention and reveled in her ability to do no wrong. Everyone was charmed by her, classmates, teachers, and even neighbors we barely knew. She shone like a star, and I faded into the background, left to wonder if anyone noticed me at all. People primarily identified me as Emma's older sister, rather than seeing me for my own qualities. It was a lonely spot to occupy. The summer after my high school graduation marked a turning point. Having been accepted at a respectable college with partial scholarship funds, I felt thrilled about breaking away from home. I genuinely believed a little distance might help reset my relationship with my parents, that maybe they would miss me, or at least see me in a new light. However, that hope turned out to be misplaced. Meanwhile, Emma started dating Jake, the charismatic star quarterback from our high school. He was tall, came from a wealthy family, and my parents were enchanted by him on sight. They behaved as if they'd gained another child, cooking sumptuous meals, throwing weekend gatherings, and practically mapping out Emma and Jake's wedding before they even started discussing long-term plans. Seeing their adoration for him only made my sense of isolation grow deeper. Meanwhile, I entered college, took on a part-time job to cover the expenses my scholarship didn't, and returned home for holidays totally exhausted. But all I ever heard was glowing praise for Emma's ongoing successes, or Jake's grand gestures. Nobody even paused to ask about my well-being. Then the real bomb dropped. On one of my visits home during a break, Emma's brand new gold charm bracelet, which Jake had given her as a lavish present, suddenly vanished. It was an undeniably pricey accessory, and Emma was inconsolable. My parents were frantic. They turned the house inside out looking for it. But instead of discovering it, Emma pointed the blame at me. At first, I thought she might be teasing in a sisterly way, but her face showed she was deadly serious. She claimed that she noticed me admiring it, and insisted I'd snatched it out of bitterness. The accusation stunned me. I had never laid a finger on that bracelet, barely remembered what it looked like. Still, my parents didn't hesitate. They immediately believed Emma. I yelled out my innocence, again and again, but my pleas fell on deaf ears. My own father declared, "We always suspected you envied Emma," and my mother just glared as though I was a stranger in our home. Their distrust weighed more than words can convey. It was like years of trying to do the right thing vanished in the blink of an eye. Without proof of my innocence, and with my parents refusing to consider my side of the story, they issued an ultimatum. I had to give back the bracelet, or pack my things and leave. I was left speechless. They had already concluded I was guilty, and there was nothing I could say to change their minds. Defeated and feeling betrayed, I left, taking a small bag of belongings with me and slamming the door behind me. That was the day I severed ties. I couch-surfed at a friend's place until I stabilized my situation. The heartbreak was devastating, but I never regretted taking my stand. I couldn't remain under the same roof as people who would so easily condemn me based on Emma's word alone. In the aftermath, it felt like I was adrift without a safety net. I balanced college with demanding side jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, with no emotional or financial support from my family. There were dark days when I questioned if I could keep it together, but perseverance became my only choice. Eventually, I graduated and found decent employment. Meanwhile, through sporadic gossip and second-hand info, I learned that Emma was doing spectacularly well, still with Jake, thriving at a fancy marketing firm, courtesy of a connection my dad set up. They carried on as though nothing had changed. My parents bragged about Emma and Jake like we were living in a TV commercial for the perfect family. It hurt to see them so content, as if they barely noticed the daughter they had banished. 5 long years slipped by before I heard from my parents at all. In that span, the only person who showed me any genuine warmth was my grandmother on my father's side. She would occasionally drop me a note for my birthday, or text me, ensuring I knew I wasn't completely alone. Then, out of nowhere, I received an invitation to join my grandmother's Christmas dinner. At first, I didn't want to go. I worried it was some setup to corner me into reconciling. But Grandma's messages were always gentle, never demanding, and a part of me longed to see if things had shifted in any positive way. When I walked into my grandmother's place, the past came flooding back. My parents were there, Emma was there with Jake at her side, and a host of extended family members filled the living room. The tension was thick enough to slice with a knife. My parents greeted me as though forced. Emma pretended all was peachy, and everything felt so forced and awkward. It was painful to stand among people who expected me to nod and smile as if the horrors of our family rift had never transpired. The evening dragged on until Grandma decided to hand out gifts. That's when I got the shock of my life. Inside the box she gave me was a vintage heirloom, a gold locket that symbolized far more than mere jewelry. It was the key to the family's legacy, an artifact passed down over generations. Whoever held it was essentially the one entrusted with future family assets. Grandma had skipped over her son, my father, and everyone else, giving it to me directly. The atmosphere in the room changed the instant everyone realized the implications. My parents and Emma turned ashen, their polite smiles morphing into forced, jittery grins. The rest of the evening stumbled along in stiff awkwardness. Not surprisingly, my parents cornered me soon afterward. Suddenly, They adopted a softer tone, apologizing and claiming they wanted me to reintegrate with the family. But it didn't take a genius to figure out that their newfound humility revolved around the potential inheritance attached to that locket. As soon as they saw me as the rightful future owner, they scrambled to ensure they could benefit, too. My father even suggested we start over with a clean slate, as if they could flip a switch and make the old wounds vanish. Extended relatives chimed in, reciting old clichés like "you can't turn your back on blood," and "family is all that matters," in hopes I would relent and welcome everyone with open arms. Deep down, though, I knew their abrupt shift was purely motivated by greed and self-interest, not a real desire to heal the damage they had caused. Naturally, I felt torn. The entire situation left me second-guessing myself. Could I really rejoin this family, aware they only valued me for my position as heir? Or was it best to walk away for good and never look back? After that Christmas gathering, I headed back to my apartment feeling stuck in a storm of conflicting emotions. The entire night had been draining. My parents wouldn't stop flashing apologetic glances in my direction, Emma couldn't wipe that artificially sweet smile off her face, and all of them were angling to get in my good graces, clearly because of the material advantages the locket carried. The sincerity of their efforts was obviously questionable, making me want to hide away just to breathe. During the following days, I realized I needed a real conversation with Grandma. This piece of jewelry, and everything it represented, was not a small matter. I had zero interest in stirring up more drama, or being forced into the family's superficial world. When I finally met up with Grandma, I didn't skirt around the issue. I thanked her for trusting me with such a monumental family treasure, and I openly confessed my reservations. It wasn't about coveting the assets. I just didn't want the inheritance to become an anchor that dragged me back into the toxic environment I had worked so hard to escape. Grandma gave me her full attention, letting me talk through all my pent-up frustrations. Then she told me she had been quietly observing for years, watching as my parents and Emma distanced themselves from her, too, and how they discarded me without a second thought. She told me she felt heartbreak watching how unevenly they treated me, especially when she knew I had struggled to hold down part-time jobs while studying, whereas Emma was handed everything on a silver platter. Grandma explained that she avoided stepping in, because she believed that adults have to live their own lives and make their own choices, even if those choices are misguided. But she also said she recognized my sense of responsibility. That's why she deliberately chose me as the inheritor. She saw me as the only one who wouldn't misuse the family's property or money. Hearing her validation was overwhelming, like finally being seen for the person I truly was. But it also made my predicament heavier. I felt relieved that Grandma understood my ordeal, but I was still uneasy about the baggage that came with the inheritance. It was comforting to learn she had already set everything in her will, yet it created tension I knew my parents and Emma would exploit. They had realized they might be cut out of the family wealth, and now they were re-emerging, hungry to reforge ties. Hello again, everyone. I returned to college soon after the holiday fiasco, hoping to find some peace. But that tranquility was short-lived. My inbox exploded with calls and messages from family members, each repeating the same old mantras about how I had an obligation to fix our relationships, spouting lines like "don't let money destroy the family." It drove me up the wall, because none of these people had shown me any compassion when I was wrongly accused and turned out of the house. Now they acted as if we were best friends, determined to see me reunited with my parents and sister. They either didn't know or didn't care to know how thoroughly my parents had disregarded me for so many years. To them, I was the difficult one for not letting it go. The constant barrage of guilt was draining. Then, one afternoon, just as I was about to relax, I got the shock of my life. My parents and Emma materialized at my apartment door. To clarify, they came unannounced. They never asked if I was open to a visit, they simply showed up. My mom was visibly in tears, my dad's expression was grim, and Emma was stone-faced. They knocked and called out my name, sounding desperate. My friend, who'd been crashing with me for a few months, was terrified. I stood frozen, unsure how to respond. When I cracked open the door, they immediately launched into pleas. My mother, tears streaming down her cheeks, begged me to make amends and claimed they couldn't stand losing me. My father repeated that they were ready to forgive me, phrasing it like I was somehow the villain. Emma just hovered in the background, exuding an uncomfortable mixture of concern and calculation, clearly worried about the inheritance, and how the family finances might slip out of her control if we didn't make nice. I tried to keep my composure, telling them we shouldn't have such a private conversation in the hallway, but they were relentless. My mother pushed past me, stepping into my apartment's living area, while my father guarded the doorway, determined not to leave. They kept emphasizing that Emma might get married soon, so it was crucial we become a single, united family in time for the grand event. They claimed I was the primary obstacle to achieving that unity. My neighbors, stirred by the commotion, popped their heads out, making the entire exchange even more humiliating. My mother even sank to her knees at one point, sobbing that I was abandoning them, while Emma lingered nearby with a self-assured tilt to her head, as though she was confident they'd break my resolve. After many agonizing minutes, I reached my limit and called building security. 2 security personnel showed up, initially speaking politely, but my parents refused to budge. Eventually, security threatened to call the police, and only then did my parents finally retreat, but not before my mother shouted a dramatic line about me casting my family aside. The entire fiasco attracted half the neighbors' attention, and left me feeling both enraged and deeply embarrassed. Emma didn't stop at that. After they left, she fired off a massive group text to many of my acquaintances, portraying me as a monster who had turned my back on my devoted parents. She conveniently left out how they had thrown me out over a made-up theft allegation. My friends were startled, unsure what to think, because they'd never witnessed this side of Emma or my parents before. I spent days explaining the real story to clear my reputation. It was mentally draining. The level of manipulation she displayed, obtaining their phone numbers, constructing a misleading narrative, was chilling. In that instant, I fully grasped how far my family was willing to go to keep me under their thumb. Now, as I focus on my future, I'm consumed with the question of whether their harassment will ever stop, or if they'll keep pushing until I relent. The emotional burden weighs me down, but I'm determined not to yield. I fought too hard for the life I have now. I'm not about to hand it over just because they feel entitled. Hello again, folks. I have more updates, and they're absolutely unreal. My grandma found out about the unannounced confrontation at my apartment, and she was furious enough to confront other relatives, and set them straight about what had really happened. Apparently, my parents had been spreading a story that the reason I was ejected from the house was because the missing gold bracelet was discovered in my possession, hidden in a drawer. According to them, that proof of my theft justified the decision to cast me out. Grandma was stunned to hear such a blatant lie. She had suspected something was amiss when my parents never gave a consistent explanation for our falling out, but she didn't realize the extent of the fabrication. She took it upon herself to speak with various uncles, aunts, and cousins, explaining the actual events. Emma misplaced her bracelet, pointed the finger at me, my parents believed her without evidence, and then they gave me no chance to defend myself. My relatives were beside themselves. Some admitted they had only heard my parents' twisted version, so they had deemed me a troublemaker. Now that they knew the real story, they were horrified and began to question everything they had been told. Suddenly, I was receiving messages from family members who had previously turned their backs on me or called me names, offering apologies, and trying to backpedal their past criticisms. They kept insisting they didn't want money issues to fracture the family, and that they had been misled by my parents from the start. I also learned other secrets about my family's finances and about Emma. Apparently, my father had taken out an extra mortgage on their home to help pay for Emma's lavish dream wedding, which was sinking them into more debt. But the biggest twist was about Emma's relationship with Jake. Rumor had it they split up. At first, that news shocked me, since my parents painted them as the next power couple. But then I heard the probable cause. Emma's meltdown-prone nature and unrealistic demands drove Jake away. Furthermore, he saw that the guaranteed family money wasn't so guaranteed after all, seeing that I now held the heirloom and had every right to the inheritance. He chose to exit the relationship rather than gamble on a financially unpredictable future. It was surreal to watch the perfect vision my parents had built around Emma slowly collapse. Now the same extended family members, who had once called me disloyal or ungrateful, wanted to console me. They texted or phoned, telling me they realized how twisted the whole situation was and that they felt remorseful for taking my parents' side. Yet, I was skeptical. It was all too convenient for them to turn around and pledge support once the truth emerged and once they realized that I had Grandma's backing and the symbolic authority that came with the heirloom. If they could be swayed so quickly by my parents' lies once, who's to say they wouldn't flip-flop again if it became more advantageous? Not surprisingly, my parents also attempted a renewed contact, but this time, their approach was subdued and almost desperate. They offered shallow apologies, tiptoeing around me with careful words, but I could tell their real interest remained in the potential inheritance that would one day become mine. I no longer had faith in their sincerity. As for Emma, she remained mostly quiet, likely because she was still reeling from Jake's departure, and the sudden financial turmoil swirling around my father. She'd lost her golden ticket. Through it all, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a layer had finally peeled back, exposing the reality of our toxic dynamics. Yes, it hurt to have it confirmed in such a dramatic fashion, but there was also a feeling of release. I wasn't the failure my parents labeled me as. I was the daughter they had undervalued and cast out. Now, ironically, they were scrambling to win me back, just so they could hold on to a comfortable future. It was a bizarre twist of fate, one that left me more convinced than ever that I needed to prioritize my own life. I owed them no apology, no immediate forgiveness, and definitely no easy access to the inheritance. At this point, I'm determined to move forward, keep striving in my career, and cherish the genuine friendships I've cultivated outside my family circle. For so many years, it felt like I was trapped in Emma's shadow, overshadowed by my parents' unwavering devotion to her. Now, I stand in my own spotlight. It may be complicated, but it's mine. I'm grateful that Grandma saw me for who I really am, validating the hard work and independence I had to cultivate just to stand on my own 2 feet. The rest of the family, they can watch from the sidelines until they learn that love and loyalty aren't just words to be tossed around when inheritance is on the line. That's everything for now. Thank you, everyone, for sticking with me. It hasn't been easy coping with all the pressure and the manipulative stunts, but I finally see the bigger picture. My life is no longer governed by their impossible expectations and manufactured drama. Despite the chaos, I'm hopeful about my future. Yes, it's been one tumultuous ride, but at last, I'm starting to feel that I'm stepping away from their toxic pull and reclaiming my sense of self.